Hi, friends. It's your old pal Papa Dale here once again. I'm a retired pastor, teacher, theologian, and professor with over 50 years of service to the Lord Jesus Christ. My name is Dale Warren, but professionally I'm known in my writings and lectures and teaching as D.A. Warren. But my friends just call me Papa Dale, and you can call me Papa Dale too. You can see the details of my testimony, my family history, education, and ministry experience on other videos on this playlist. But for now, let's get right into today's topic. Today's topic is Literary Devices Part 2. Now this is part of the JHI, the Jan Hus Institute of Biblical Studies. This is the BA in Biblical Literature degree, and this is lecture number 24, or Literary Devices Part 2. To start off, let's introduce the study of biblical literature. Let's find out what is a literary device. A literary device refers to a technique or tool that authors of biblical texts use to convey meaning, evoke emotion, or enhance the narrative. These devices often help readers to interpret the deeper significance of the text, recognize patterns, and understand the underlying messages or themes. Literary devices in biblical literature include structures like parallelism, figures of speech like metaphors, and rhetorical techniques like chiasms, among other things. They're integral to both the theological and literary analysis of biblical texts, providing layers of meaning and insight into the spiritual and moral lessons intended by the authors. So let's look at biblical analogy. Biblical analogy is a method used to draw comparisons between different elements to illustrate or clarify a point. It involves likening one thing to another to provide insight or deeper understanding, often by highlighting similarities between disparate concepts. For example, in John 15, 1 through 5, Jesus uses the analogy of the vine and branches to explain the relationship between himself and his followers. He says, "I am the true vine and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit. I am the vine and you are the branches." This analogy helps illustrate the necessity of staying connected to Christ in order to bear spiritual fruit. In Matthew chapter 13, verses 31 and 32, the parable of the mustard seed, Jesus compares the kingdom of heaven to a mustard seed, which, though small, grows into a large tree. This analogy emphasizes how something small and seemingly insignificant can grow into something great and significant. Analogies in the Bible are used to convey spiritual truth in a way that makes complex concepts more relatable and easier to understand. Next up is biblical anthropomorphism. Biblical anthropomorphism is a literary device where human traits, emotions, or actions are attributed to God or to other divine entities, or to make abstract or transcendent concepts more relatable and understandable. This approach helps bridge the gap between the divine and the human experience by using familiar human characteristics to describe God's nature or actions. For example, Genesis in chapter 3, verse 8, God is described as walking in the garden in the cool of the day. This anthropomorphism conveys a sense of intimacy and presence, making God's relationship with humanity more relatable. Another example would be Psalm 98, verse 1. The psalmist describes God's victory with phrases like, "His right hand and his holy arm have worked salvation for him. Here, God's actions are described in human terms to emphasize his power and salvation. In Exodus chapter 15, verse 8, in the Song of Moses, the water is described as congealing or standing like a wall at the Red Sea. This anthropomorphism illustrates the miraculous nature of the event in terms familiar to human experience. These anthropomorphic descriptions are not meant to imply that God is literally human, but to communicate divine attributes and actions in ways that humans can comprehend. Well, another literary device is the biblical apostrophe. Biblical apostrophe is a rhetorical device where the speaker directly addresses an absent person, an abstract idea, or an inanimate object as if it were capable of understanding and responding. This technique is used to express emotions or thoughts more vividly and to engage the audience in a more personal way. For example, Psalm 114:5 says, "Why was it, O sea, that you fled? O Jordan, that you turned back?" Here, the psalmist addresses the sea and the Jordan River, personifying them to express wonder and amazement at the miraculous events described. In Isaiah chapter 55, verse 12, it says, quote, "You will go out in joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and hills will burst into song before you, and all the trees of the field will clap their hands." End quote. In this passage, inanimate objects like mountains, hills, and trees are personified to illustrate the joy and celebration of the restoration and salvation promised by God. Apostrophe in the Bible often serves to highlight divine power or to underscore significant moments of transformation and revelation. Another literary device is biblical irony. Biblical irony involves using language or situations to convey a meaning that is opposite or different from the literal interpretation. It often highlights, contradicts, or unexpected outcomes to emphasize a deeper truth or moral lesson. There are different types of irony found in the Bible. There's dramatic irony. This occurs when the audience or reader knows something that the characters in the narrative do not. For example, in the story of Job, the audience is aware right from the beginning of the heavenly conversation with God and Satan, and Job is not. This dramatic irony heightens the tension and the trials that Job faces. There's verbal irony. This involves saying one thing but meaning another. For example, in 1 Kings 18:27, the prophet Elijah mocks the prophets Baal, saying, "Shout louder! Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought or busy traveling." In the Hebrew it says, "Perhaps he's gone to the bathroom." Elijah's words are intended to be sarcastic, contrasting with the actual ineffectiveness of Baal. Then there is stationary irony. This type occurs when there is a discrepancy between what is expected and what actually happens. A notable example is the story of Jonah. He runs away from God's command to preach to Nineveh. Ironically, he ends up in the belly of a fish, where he repents and ultimately fulfills his mission. Biblical irony often serves to reveal deeper truths about human nature, divine justice, or the complexities of faith. Another literary device is biblical personification. Biblical personification is a literary device where non-human entities, abstract concepts, or inanimate objects are given human attributes, emotions, or actions. This technique helps convey deeper meanings or moral lessons by making abstract ideas more relatable and understandable. For example, Proverbs 8, verses 3 through 1. Wisdom is personified as a woman, calling out to people, inviting them to gain insight. Quote, "Does not wisdom call out? Does not understanding raise her voice?" End quote. This personification helps illustrate the value and importance of wisdom in a vivid and relatable manner. Another example would be Psalm 114:4. Quote, "The mountains skipped like rams, the hills like lambs." End quote. Here mountains and hills are personified with animal-like behavior to emphasize the dramatic nature of the events being described, such as crossing of the Red Sea or the Jordan River. And then another example would be Romans 8, verse 22. Quote, "We know the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time." End quote. Creation is personified as groaning, which reflects the anticipation and suffering experienced in the expectation of redemption. Personification in the Bible helps to make spiritual truths more accessible by presenting them in terms familiar to human experience. Now there is another device called biblical idiom. Biblical idiom refers to phrases or expressions used in the Bible that have a meaning different from the literal interpretation of the words. These idioms often reflect the cultural and linguistic context of ancient times, and they may require understanding beyond a straightforward translation in order to grasp their full significance. For example, quote, "To put off the old man," Paul says in Ephesians 4:22. This idiom means to discard one's former way of life, of sinful behaviors, of ignoring the flaws in our flesh, and adopt a new and righteous way of living. It uses the metaphor of changing clothes to represent this transformation. Another example would be, quote, "To have a heart of stone," Ezekiel 36:26. This idiom describes someone who is emotionally or spiritually unresponsive, showing a lack of empathy or compassion. It contrasts with having a heart of flesh, which symbolizes a sensitive and responsive heart, especially towards God. Quote, "To be in the cleft of the rock," is another example, Exodus 33:22. This biblical idiom refers to a place of safety or protection. In the context of the Bible, it represents being sheltered by God from harm or danger. Understanding biblical idioms often requires knowledge of the historical and cultural context in which they were used, as their meanings can be deeply rooted in the language and customs of the time. This has been your old pal, Papa Dale. This is the year 2024. You're invited to leave comments, questions, or prayer requests below, and if I'm able to get to them, I will and respond. Until the next video, this is your old pal, Papa Dale, also saying that I will be thinking of you and praying for you, that you will be well and that you will be blessed.